Welcome to part 4 of perception. For some reason, this chapter seems to get longer every year. Last time we ended up talking about some errors in perception of other people. And so this chapter, or this section, we're going to talk about how to increase your accuracy when it comes to perceiving others. Because who doesn't want to be more accurate in their perceptions of other people? It's going to make less conflict. It's going to make less problems for both sides. And so there are lots of different ways to do it. The first way is by analyzing your impressions. Just think about it for a second. Are my impressions accurate? Is my personal mindset, is my frame of reference changing how I view somebody? Let's say when you were a kid, somebody with red hair beat you up a lot. And so now you have this psychological issue with people with red hair. And so you meet somebody that you don't even really know them, but you already think, oh, that person's a bitch because they have red hair. So think about it. Is your frame of reference, is your mood changing the way you view somebody? You know, you need to understand your biases. We all have them. It's part of being a human being. We all have biases. We all have things that we like, we don't like, even if we're not really psychologically aware of them. But it's important to understand that you do have biases and try to overcome them when thinking about some other person. Another way is through reduction of uncertainty. When it comes to meeting people and building and forming relationships, it's all about reducing uncertainty, getting to know them, communicating with them, exposing yourself more to them. Because as you gain more familiarity with that person or that thing or whatever, your perceptions are going to change. So maybe when you first meet somebody, you don't particularly care for them, or you really like them, but then as you get to know them, you gain more information to put in that folder for that person, and you either really grow to like them, or perhaps you really grow to hate them. If you've ever watched the show Survivor, you see this a lot, where when they first get together, people are like, oh, I love you, you're my best friend, and then 3 days later, they're like, I want you to die. Because they gain more information, and they see how that person interacts with other people, they talk to other people about that other person, and they interact with them more, they question, they just communicate more self-disclosure, and all of a sudden, that initial perception, they realize, that's probably not correct. And that's okay. It's okay. What's not okay is to get all this new information and to leave them in that initial folder. Because that's when you start getting into prejudice and discrimination and that sort of thing. Another way is by what is known as perception checking. And perception checking is simply asking another person if your perceptions are accurate. So let's say you have a teacher, and you hate that teacher. You're like, oh my God, that teacher hates me. They're so hard. Right? And then you go ask somebody, hey, does so-and-so, do they treat you like this? Do you think it's really hard? And everybody you talk to is like, no, not at all. I have no idea what you're talking about. They're fantastic. Their teaching style is superb. They're super friendly and open. And then you might want to say, well, if everybody else is saying that they're nice and friendly and awesome, maybe my perceptions are inaccurate. They're invalid. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not the one that's correct. Because there are times when everybody else is sort of fooled by somebody, and you're the one who kind of sees through it. For those of you who have read Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, the Professor Lockhart, Gilderoy Lockhart, he's the new dark arts teacher, and he fools everybody. Like, everybody believes that he's this awesome guy because he's got a lot of charisma and he uses charms on people a lot. But Harry's like, this guy's a rat. I can feel it. And so if Harry went and perception checked with everybody else, Harry would have been like, oh my God, I'm wrong. But in that particular case, he was right. So even though everybody might disagree with your perceptions, doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't the one whose perceptions are valid. So that's a good way to do it. Another way to do it is, we live in an ever-expanding cultural world. And every culture communicates very, very differently. And sometimes those cultural behaviors clash. And we're going to talk more about that in the culture section, which is weeks and weeks down the road. For example, most Asian cultures don't make eye contact. They consider it rude, especially with people who are older. But in America, we like eye contact. To us, eye contact is important. And when people aren't making eye contact with us, we are like, what are they hiding? Are they shifty? Are they lying? But if they're from, let's say, Japan, you have to say, wait a second, in Japan, they don't make eye contact with people. They consider it rude. So you have to take that into account when dealing with people from other cultures so that you are not being culturally insensitive. Another one is, and this is the big one. Are you ready? Everybody sitting down? Accept ambiguity. There is nothing in the world that is set in stone. Everybody's a different person. Because everybody's different, their behaviors are different. So one behavior doesn't mean the same thing with everybody. And you have to be willing to say, you know what? Okay, maybe that's just how they are. If you've ever known somebody who has what I refer to as resting bitch face, they just look angry all the time. Well, normally when you see that, you're like, oh my God, that person hates me. But maybe that's just how that person looks. That's just how they interact with people. Their normal facial expression looks dour. And so you have to be willing to say, you know what, that they might not be pissed. That's just how they are. So it's really important to be able to be flexible when it comes to perception. Perception isn't accurate all the time. And when you're perceptual, when you are guilty of perceptual inaccuracies, it can lead to bad things. It can lead to prejudice. And prejudice is perfectly normal. Prejudice is simply making a judgment about somebody based on a lack of information. Basically, you're ignorant of something. And ignorant isn't a negative term. Ignorance just means you don't have knowledge. So if you don't know anything about people from Ethiopia, and you're like, the people from Ethiopia don't get to eat, because back when I was a kid, they had the big famine, so the joke was, an Ethiopian restaurant would open and people were like, oh, Ethiopians have food? We were being giant jerks. But that's because that was our prejudice. That's what we believe. Of course that is ignorant. We weren't being mean about it. So prejudice is perfectly normal. It's natural. Everybody's prejudiced about something, or lots of things, because they just don't have the knowledge of everything. Prejudice becomes negative when it becomes discrimination. And discrimination is when you act on those prejudice. Like, you may have prejudice about a group of people, and that's okay. You just need to get more information. But if you start treating them differently based on those prejudices, you start being mean to them or treating them poorly or treating them in a certain way, that's when it becomes bad, because that's when it becomes discrimination. And discrimination is never acceptable in any format. Essentially being a bigot, and I personally, I don't like bigots very much at all. A bigot's a bigot no matter what they use to excuse it, and that's never a good thing. And discrimination can take the form of any ism. We always hear about racism, and racism is simply judging another person based on their race. Well, I got news for you people. There's no such thing as race. There is no biological or scientific basis for the concept of race. Race was created by organizations, i.e. the government, to label people. So there is no difference between Caucasian and black or Pacific Islander or whatever. It's completely a social construct, if you will. And we always hear about that. Actually, that's what I always do when I'm asked to fill in one of those equal opportunity forms and ask me what my race is. I usually put Pacific Islander, although I have put other things from time to time. I put a Wookiee one time because it's ignorant and it doesn't matter. They shouldn't be asking you that question. There's no reason that anybody needs to know that. But there's other isms too. There's ageism, where you're being discriminatory towards people of different ages. They could be younger people, they could be older people. There is sexism, when you're discriminating against somebody's gender. male or female. There could be ableism, where, if you're somebody who has some sort of handicap issue and you're being judgmental towards people who are able-bodied. We all know about the other way too, where people are, they discriminate against people who are disabled in some way, shape, or form. There's all sorts of isms, and none of them are good. They're all bad. And they all result from perceptual inaccuracies. That list that I just went through at the beginning of this slide, of this video, all those things lead to these perceptual inaccuracies. And that's why when you are making perceptions about other people, you want to make sure that you are not guilty of those perceptual inaccuracies. So that is how to better view your impressions of other people. Now we're going to take a look at how to control people's impressions of us, of how they see us. It's called impression management. And impression management is simply the process by which you go through your daily life in order to get people to view you in a certain way. And this book talks about different strategies, which I really like because they're all very different, and we use different strategies depending on the situation. So for example, when we want to be liked, which is a lot of the time because we want people to like us, we use what are known as affinity seeking strategies. And this is where we do things to make people like us. We're polite. We flatter them. We use the concept of positive or negative face, which I won't get into now because that is literally the most complicated thing in the entire semester. We'll get into that in its own chapter. But the concept of being polite, it's just when people are polite to us, we tend to be polite back to them. So that's what we do when we want to be liked. When we want to be believed, we do things to improve our credibility. So if you're at work and you want your boss to believe you, what do? You want to do things to make yourself more credible. You show up on time. You work late. You come in on the weekends. You get things done on time. You do those because you want your boss to believe you and to like you, so that somewhere on down the road, you can get something in return. It also works kind of on the negative side of things. We use impression management strategies to excuse our failures. Nobody wants to be a failure. Nobody wants to appear like they're failing at something. So oftentimes when we fail, what we do are use self-handicapping strategies. And this is where we set up barriers so that when we do fail, like for example, let's say you're in a math class and you keep saying to people, man, I'm really bad at math. I just don't understand math. Those are barriers you're setting up. So what happens when you fail math? What can you say? I told you I was bad at math, right? I told you. Those are things that we set up. So if we do fail, we can blame them. Because nobody likes to accept responsibility for failure. But the problem is that creates a false image of who you are. When we want help, what do? We look helpless. Self-deprecating strategies. Think about the movies or television shows when a woman's like, oh, can you help me? And they bat their eyes, right? Oh, I'm such a helpless little woman, right? That's what they do. Now, obviously, that's TV and movies because that's stereotypical. But people do stuff like that in real life. All the time, people are saying, oh, man, I don't really understand this. Can you help me because I don't want to screw it up? For example, when I was messing with some tile work in this bathroom, I was really nervous. I was going to screw it up. So I was like, man, I don't know what I'm doing, man. You do this a lot. Can you help me? So I made myself look weaker, even though I could have probably done it on my own, which I ended up doing most of it on my own. I wanted to appear more helpless so somebody would help me. Those are self-deprecating strategies. We also set up, we control things around us to hide our faults. Self-monitoring strategies. So let's say you go on a date, and let's say you're a big nerd. Like, I'm the king of the nerds. I'm a gamer. I play role-playing games. I play video games. I read comic books. I'm super nerd, and I'm proud of that fact. Other people aren't. Other people like to hide it. So when they meet people, they don't tell it. They don't let their crazy flag fly right off the bat. My crazy flag is always flying. It's always back there. It's never not flying because I don't care that much about what other people think about me in certain areas. And so, but a lot of people don't do that. They'll watch what they say. I swear a lot. That's one thing when I meet people. At first, I try not to swear as much because some people don't like swearing. So I don't want to offend people. So I really watch what I say to hide that fault. Although I don't personally consider it a fault other people do. When we want to be followed, when we want to exert our influence, we exert various forms of power. And power gets its own section in a much later chapter. But basically, there are all sorts of different powers, from coercive power, which was where they think that you're going to harm them in some way. It could be that you're an expert or you have knowledge that they do. You exert that power. You say, hey, I'm the expert here, to get people to follow you. And then lastly, these are things that we use to confirm our self-concept, our self-perception to other people. So if we think that we're good in sports, we want to do things so other people will also see us as good in sports. And those are image confirming strategies. If you're a good cook, you do things to make people think you're a good cook. And so when they eat your food and they're like, oh man, this is delicious, you're like, I told you I was a good cook. So that is perception. It really does seem to get longer every semester, even though I try to trim it every time. Be sure to look at the last slide of your PowerPoint slides because that has the journal and the discussion board prompt on them. And join us next time when we're talking about relationships.